This is another episode of Recon Live. I'm Bruce Quick alongside Jason Whitmire. And before we get started on today's episode and today's guest, we wanted to remind you to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook. That's at Recon. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Make sure you turn on those post notifications so you catch up on all the latest episodes, as well as the new ones coming out. And then finally, visit our website, rigrecon.com, for all the latest apparatus information, including product comparisons, product videos, how-to videos. You name it, we probably got it on the website. And if we don't, we're probably making it right now, Jason. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, Rob Fisher. Today, we're going to be talking about Quints and Quint designs and operations. But I won't take any of your thunder. So, Rob, thanks for joining us today, and maybe give the audience a little brief introduction of yourself and background of things you're involved in.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a retired battalion chief out of Snohomish County area up in the state of Washington. That's about 35 miles north of Seattle. Was a suburban firefighter and promoted up through the ranks. Retired after 36 years in the fire service. I got into the Quint stuff because I was working on a Quint. I got promoted to company officer and I really wanted to be a truckie. And we had this thing called the Quint, which was kind of the bastard of the ladder company. So this is in the 90s. Yeah, I should say mid to late 90s. I had driven it. I was a firefighter on it. Now I was going to be a company officer on it. So in my area, things were changing, and so we were looking for more truck operations, and we had this Quint. So that kind of led to developing curriculum for working on the Quint. Developing truck focused, kind of more of a mindset of a truck, but yet working on a Quint. I got to help spec out another Quint in my career. And then towards the end of my career, before I got promoted to battalion chief, we spec'd out a TDA that originally was going to be a Quint, but we took the pump and tank off of it, and we went with a stored calf system, which is a whole nother approach to a truck with suppression capabilities. But so I did all of that. I've been writing articles on Quints. I've written for Fire Engineering. Most recent article was this year before FDIC. It was called Quint Considerations for the Single Family Dwelling Fire. And I've lectured at FDIC for a number of years, and I'm a CFT cadre member. I'm a Brothers in Battle cadre member. I co-founded a mentoring leadership group called Young Officers on Fire. I'm at a lot of conferences, even though I'm retired, and that's kind of the way I stay connected with everything. So that's what's going on now.
Awesome. We're happy to have you on board. We're happy to tie some of the hands-on experience you have into what we're doing here with Rig Recon today. Most of our audience knows we typically talk about the apparatus side of things, but it's great to tie training and practical application into it as well. So yeah, for today, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's part of the problem with Quints is I think that one of the things in the article we talk about was the planning portion of it. And I think a lot of departments miss that aspect, and they just want to get an aerial device, and they're sold on getting it as a Quint, and there's not much planning into it. So without the planning and the application side of things, they've got this bastardized apparatus that they don't know what to do with.
Yep. So as we've already mentioned, today's subject is Quints, and I'm going to dive right in with a fun little jab and controversial comment maybe. I was in the apparatus world for a long time, designing and engineering apparatus, and when someone ordered a Quint, we always said, oh, so you don't want a ladder truck. You want half a ladder and half a pumper. And you're not a true pumper. You're not a true ladder truck. I would ask you, Rob, how would you respond to that question?
Well, I'm fortunate. I've got a lot of buddies across the nation, and I get pictures sent to me all the time, and memes sent to me. There was one, I think it was in 2017 or 18, during April Fool's. They had said that NFPA was going to require all apparatus to be Quints. There was going to be no engines. There was going to be no ladder trucks. They were going to just all be Quints. And you'd be surprised at how many people got in an uproar on the socials with it. But yeah, I've heard it all. And to a lot of degree, it's true. I mean, it is I guess the way that I put it when I was on the job, and if we didn't stretch on a fire, some of the officers on the engine would be a little bit insulted, which I thought, well, that's weird. You're the one that wants the work. You want the stretch. And they'd say, and my response would be, if I took the aerial device off of this huge truck that had two pre-connects at the time, would you want this to be your engine? And the answer was typically no. So the truth of the matter is, yes, it is. It's a half of everything, and no different if you were, it depends on what part of the country you're in, if it's a tanker or a tender. But if you had a tanker or a tender engine, you have to give up things to make its primary use, or what its use is going to be for, is moving a lot of water to the scene, like in a rural area. You have to give up aspects of being an engine. So there's different engines out there, urban, suburban, rural engines. Just the same that when it comes to ladder trucks, an urban ladder truck is going to be different than a suburban ladder truck. And I think, and one of the, in my article, one of the things I covered is that the suburban ladder truck is the Quint. And so again, you got to give up things. So it's a matter of, like, when you're speccing it, or again, the planning process, when you're getting ready to do the planning, are you going to spec out a ladder truck that can have suppression capabilities, or are you going to spec out an engine that's crippled with an aerial device on its back and limited functions as an engine? So that's why the planning, or the thought going into it is critical when you go to do this. So yeah, I've heard them all, and it's we have in Washington, we have these things called houseboats. They're houses that are boats floating on water, and they're beautiful. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful, but they're not the best house, because you got to walk a long dock to get to where your house is. You can't drive your car into your garage, and they're not a good boat. You wouldn't want to take this out on the sound or on the ocean. So it's the same thing, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah, and you started to touch on a subject for our next question here. So apparatus weight's got to be a huge factor when it comes to design and the function of what you're using it for. And by adding a fire pump and water to a ladder truck, you naturally have to give up some things. And one critical item would be ground ladder, excuse me. So can you talk about ground ladder complements when it comes to a Quint?
Yeah, well, NFPA recently changed the 2024 NFPA 1900 came out, so it combined everything. So it has actually, which is a surprise to a lot of people, a lot of in our industry, it eliminated the ground ladder requirement, minimum ground ladder requirement. But if we were to go back in the days, 208 feet was the minimum requirement for an aerial device, and that was first reduced down to 163 feet. And then in the 1990s, NFPA Quint started to become more and more popular, and so they reduced it down to 115 feet for an aerial device and 85 feet for a Quint. And up until 2024, those were the numbers. And in fact, when you Google or you're searching, you'll still find where they'll talk about the 85 feet of ground ladders needed for a Quint. But yeah, you're absolutely right. When we put a tank and a pump, and it starts to creep into not only compartment space, but the ladder tunnel and how much ground ladders you can carry. So I guess the answer is, if you were to go back to the old stuff, and even ISO and FSRS, I think, are still quoting the old numbers of 85 feet, which is typically a 24 or 35, 216s or somewhere in there, and a 10-foot collapsible ladder. And so what we ended up doing, like when we spec'd out our first Quint, we had we had like 120. Now I'm going back to the 90s, 2000. We probably had like 124 feet of ground ladders, I think, is what we were carrying on our Quint, which is really good. And then when we spec'd out the TDA, part of the reason why we wanted to go to a TDA is, even if we were a Quint with a pump and a tank on the tractor, the trailer gives us the entire, area to have a ladder package like most ladder companies would have, or an urban ladder company would have. So ours carried close to 300 feet, 254 feet. And many of them these days now carry 300 feet of ground ladders on the truck. But one of the ways that you can, again, with the Quint, one of the ways you can increase your ground ladder package is look at a TDA for it.
So when we talk about ladder packages, and you mentioned the NFPA part of it, it's a good point. The bringing ISO into it is a critical point, because I can tell you from experience and from being involved with the committee, what NFPA looked at and said was, let's stop telling people how to put their fire truck together. Let's give them the minimum guidelines, but let's not tell them exactly what they need to carry, because it's going to change around the country and around what else is in your department, what's coming with you. So I believe we moved the lengths into the annex area. But when it comes to ISO, that's your insurance rating. And that is important to know what ISO is looking at to make sure you're covering it with everything you're carrying. When it comes to the actual ladder package, however, not so much the lengths of ladders, but some specific different ladders that exist in the market. Is there one that you feel is missed a lot, or something that people just, they forget this ladder exists? Maybe it's bulky, maybe it's awkward to work with, but maybe it provides a really good benefit on scene.
Well, that could go so many different ways, because it depends on, again, the organization, the jurisdiction, the type of organization, if it's a suburban department or if it's an urban department. But from the perspective of a Quint, if you're a suburban department and you're running a Quint, I think, again, this goes back to the planning. A lot of organizations just go with a standard package that the manufacturer recommends, and they don't spend the time or the effort to evaluate the lengths needed for the types of buildings they have in their organization. Just as we would with nozzles, you should go through and do a flow test and flow test the hose and what nozzle is best for your organization, for your staffing and everything. So the specific ladder, there are some pretty cool ladders that are out there that I think are good, but they're not a good fit for everybody. But again, it goes back to the planning and looking at your organization. So you mentioned bulky and awkward. That the first ladder I think of is the banger ladder. We did put one on our TDA. And the reason why I would say consideration for a banger ladder is if your organization responds to a lot of garden style apartments, for instance, where aerial access is limited, or aerial, basically aerial access to the building, aerial device access to the building is limited. And you have like the backside of the building that has no access whatsoever, then how are you going to ladder a 4-story building on the Charlie side? 35 really won't be able to do it. Depends on the slope and all this other stuff. But the point being is, when we became very reliant on the aerial device in the 80s and in the 80s and into the 90s, we started to see, as you saw with the change in the NFPA, you started to see less and less ground ladders being carried. And that was one of the ladders that really became an old ladder that nobody was really carrying. You only saw them in the urban areas. But so that would be one of them for consideration. It takes staffing, and you got to be creative with your staffing if you're going to have a banger ladder. On the engine side of things, engines pair up. They do tactical pairing to get a 2.5 into operation when we're in these limited staff departments. So 2-3-man engine companies can get together and get a 2.5 into operation into a building. Well, we can do that with our ground ladders too. So if a banger ladder needs 4, 5, 6 people on it, then tactically pair another company, and so you can get it into operation. The other one is actually a term that's used here on the West Coast. I first heard it in Stockton. Stockton firefighters called this thing a baby banger, and I think that comes from the old term from a wood ladder that they used, and now they've applied it to the aluminum ladders. But a baby banger it's the width of a 24-foot ladder, but it has no halyard. So it's like a 10-foot to 16-foot ground ladder that you hand extend. And the cool thing about this ladder is a lot of the apartment buildings these days that have terraces, which are kind of built down partially into the ground, it gives an odd window height on that first story window, or a window on the floor above the terrace. And so sometimes 16-foot straight ladders or roof ladders don't really work. And so it's an in-between size. So that baby banger You won't find it as Baby Banger at Duo Safety or Alkalite, but it is basically it's like an 8 foot ladder that will extend up to, or I'm sorry, it's like a 10 foot ladder that'll extend up to like 16 feet and have the width of 24. So there's two ladders that I think are unique. The other one that we see a lot of is the Little Giant. A lot of ladder companies are carrying a form of that for overhaul stuff and utility stuff. But that's another good ladder you see on truck companies.
Funny story with the Banger ladder. So I run with an engine company in a volunteer department, and we run an awful lot of mutual aid for RIT. So when we run a RIT call, one of the things that a RIT team does a lot of times is ladder any part of the building that hasn't been laddered yet. And we would love to find that TDA or that old school aerial that had a banger and throw it. And then we get a call a few days later because we didn't have to break down. RIT would be sent out of there before those guys ever cleaned up. And we get that call. Hey, thanks a lot for throwing the banger.
Because they had to take it down.
Yeah. They don't have to put it away.
Yeah. It's, when we went that way, there was a bit of criticism in our region when we got it, and they're like, why are you doing this? And I tried to explain that, we do have a number of garden style apartments, and this was the reason why. And we had an apparatus that could carry it. While our TDA was only a 3-person staff company, we would have to, pull in another company to help, get it raised. Of course, like standard firefighters and truckies, they figured out a way to throw it with a 3-person group. And the hardest part of the Banger ladder is just carrying it and getting it vertical. Once it's vertical, all the weight is on the ground, and now it's just about manipulating it.
Yep.
And let's talk a little bit about the pump sizing on a Quint. When you go to size the pump, do you base it on the elevated waterway, the total number of discharges, or something else of that fashion?
Well, our last our last ladder truck that I helped spec, we got rid of the Quint. We got rid of the pump in the tank completely and went with a calf system. So that's kind of a different approach to it. We actually got the idea from Winter Park in Florida, Eric Wheaton, and when Chief Walsh was still on the job, they had spec'd out their TDA that way. And but NFPA requires 1,000 GPM. The reason why it's required that way is for the waterway, and so you can flow basically a 2-inch smooth bore or a combination tip. But I guess now this is my personal opinion. And we had already said that the NFPA had changed, and so now ladder lengths are really, or what type of ladder you need to carry is no longer really there. And I think it's weird that NFPA, for a ladder truck, they don't even have any requirements for ground ladders on them. But the thing is that if you're going to look at what is the need for the Quint, why do I need a Quint? Does it need to be NFPA? And I know ISO and other insurance groups out there that you're getting your rating from. Do you really need a Quint? And if you don't need a Quint, then why not spec out something that meets your needs? So, having the suppression capability, I totally get it in a limited, in a smaller department, limited staffing, and having that apparatus be able to put out fire, especially if they're first arriving, they're going to be by themselves for a few minutes on a single family dwelling. Do you need to have a 1,000 GPM pump? I mean, majority of the manufacturers these days are putting 1,500 GPM pumps in them, or 2,000. So that takes more space, that's more weight. But do you really need it? And I know this would be kind of, outside of the box here, but you could use maybe a tender pump and go with only a 500 GPM because how many lines are you going to have in operation? Again, it goes back to how you're going to use the apparatus. If the apparatus is going to be used for dumpster fires and car fires and maybe a quick hit on a residential, then, you can get by with not having a high flow pump. And if you're not doing, and I'm sure we're going to talk about elevated master streams later, but not pumping your own waterway can help. So I know I'm all over the board on that, but NFPA is 1,000. Majority of them out there are 1,500. But like with anything, the bigger you go, the more space that it takes. And so I go back to like, what am I speccing this out for? Is it primarily going to be used as a ladder truck with some suppression capabilities? Then give that some consideration.
I think we'll probably repeat this multiple times if we haven't already. There's always give and take.
Yeah.
And everyone has to understand that. When you go for something bigger in one area, you're going to have to give something else up somewhere else. And that brings us around to our next subject, which is the water tank. And we keep talking about weight. So weight is always a consideration. The more ground ladders you carry, the more weight that's involved. It's a huge consideration. And I remember it being a real pain in the state of Washington where you were, because they're even more strict on the weight laws, but something to consider. So let's take a 300-gallon water tank. I'm going to throw a number out there. I'm going to say that weighs about 2,670 pounds when full. Anyone that's quick with math is going to go, these guys don't know what they're talking about. 300 gallons, 8.3 pounds per gallon. That's 2,400 and some pounds. You got to consider the tank too. So a general rule of thumb in the industry, 9 pounds per gallon is a good rule of thumb. In the industry, we usually used 8.9. I think if you talk to a tank manufacturer, that's the exact weight, is about 8.9 pounds per gallon when you factor in the poly. And that's for a poly tank. Do a stainless steel tank, that's going to be even heavier. But when you consider weight and some of the things that you're giving up, is there a minimum size tank that you would look for or an optimal size tank for a certain application?
Yeah, I mean, it, again, it comes back to the use and everything. And as you were saying, it's like it's nice that NFPA has made the adjustments so that organizations can figure out how they want to use something and not be required to, carry so much hose or whatever it is, because every organization is a little bit different. Just like when we're talking about tank size. Now, if your organization has a lot of resources on top of each other, you can go with a smaller tank size, which the minimum is 300. That is required by NFPA. But FSRI did a study, and in their studies, and it was the one about fire attack with interior line operation. And what they found out in 25 of the studies, they did 25 experiments, and in all of them, they were able to flow less than 250 gallons of water and get knockback and basically get suppression achieved. And so there's the number, and that's for two bedrooms on fire. So there gives us a number that's researched with data to kind of give you an idea exactly how much water is going to be needed. Or I shouldn't say exactly, but to give you an idea how much water can be needed. The first Quint I worked on, we had 400 gallons of water on it. We did stretch and we did fight single family dwelling fires, and we did really well. But we also had engines on top of us, and we would see an engine within a minute or two. And so that kind of helped out. And now the standard, for the most part, a lot of the manufacturers are just putting 500-gallon tanks in there. And so at that 9 pounds, that's a lot of weight. And we're not even talking about tanks that have foam cells in them, right, and carrying some foam in that as well. But that's a lot of weight and there's a lot of space. But it really comes down to the organization. But if I was doing it, I think 400 gallons does well. It's not because that's what I'm used to or what, but when you're looking at the data, 400 gallons really can do us well for single family dwelling fires. And when you have decent amount of fire on arrival and you're in kind of a defensive fire conditions and you want to pull out your inch and an eighth or inch and 3/16 and punch it in the face, 400 gallons of water there gives you, a good 45 seconds to a minute of good flow to reset the fire. So that's if your organization is looking for space and having weight issues, like in state of Washington, which they did relax a little bit on our weight issues. But yeah, if you were doing that, I'd consider 400 gallons. But if that's not an issue for you, the weight isn't an issue, the space isn't an issue, then why not carry 500?
Well, a funny story with the weight in Washington. I remember doing an aerial demo once, and the little known secret is you, as the fire department, typically get a waiver. So you can go over their weight restrictions. As the salesman, you don't get that waiver. And we were told, you can't bring that truck into the state. We're like, but it's a fire truck. The fire truck has a waiver. No, the fire department will get a waiver once they bought it. So we had to actually have them come over to Idaho to see the truck.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they were near the border, so they could come over. But
yeah, I've heard
little things.
Yeah, I've heard stories when you have to pick up the truck, you got to pick it up in Oregon and drive it up, or But yeah, you're right. In Washington, there was an exemption for fire departments, and I think the restriction was 48,000 pounds on tandem axle. And now Washington's kind of relaxed a little bit on that. But when we went to our TDA, we went with a single axle, drive axle, 31,000. And that's another way of getting around it is with the TDA, it allows for you to get, more traction on the ground, which gives you more surface area for your GVW.
Sure.
One of the big features of a Quint is the ability to provide its own water source to an elevated waterway, and elevated waterways are something that's near and dear to us here at Elkhart. So let's dive into that discussion, and maybe we can start with the straight ladder first. Do you have a preference on whether that monitor is smoothbore or a Falk style nozzle?
Well, I like simple. And we went when I was in the training division in the early 2000s. We went from having combination nozzles, automatic nozzles, and I led a study on nozzles, and we went to smoothbore, and everybody thought we were crazy. This was like in 2005, 6. Everybody thought we were crazy, but simplicity. So if I was choosing, if I had the choice, I'd pick a smoothbore over the combination tip, and while the combination tip has its advantages for creating a water curtain or utilizing it on propane tanks for cooling and all that kind of stuff. And I know that the straight stream on those has the same punch and can flow the same amount of GPM. It's just there's something to be said about a solid stream of water coming out of a smoothbore. So we used to do 2-inch, and we've reduced that down to an inch and a half tip now, flowing 600 gallons, roughly 600 gallons. And the other thing that I would change on it is I'd overpressurize the smoothbore tip, and rather than do 80 psi, shooting more for 90 to 100. It gives you a little bit more velocity and reach. And you getting over 100 causes too much breakup in the stream. But that would be what I would do versus. But that's just my opinion.
So sticking with your opinion, you may have already answered this to some extent, because you said you like simple. So I'm going to say you'd prefer a manual over an electric. But let's talk about the fact that when you do an electric control, I don't have to put someone up at the tip to move that monitor around, and some of the benefits and detractors to an electric control.
Yeah, we had electric controls. I didn't have maybe like when you see the old. Actually, I shouldn't say the old. You see LAFD, for instance. They still have those big, I don't even know what are they called?
Yeah, we always call them tiller ropes, even though it's not a tiller apparatus. But yeah, tiller ropes to control the.
Yeah, they've got the ropes, but they also have the handle. They can go up on the aerial tip, and they use the handle and adjust it.
Oh, yeah, and that's called a tiller bar.
A tiller bar, perfect. We didn't have that. We had electric controls, and I don't remember us ever having any issues with that. Now, when we spec'd out our TDA, one of the things that we did is we didn't go with a pre-plumbed waterway. We had busted our waterway a number of times on our old Quint, and we primarily used our aerial for access to and from the roof. And so we didn't do a lot of elevated master stream. We weren't an organization that was seeing a lot of defensive fires. So we went with a ladder pipe assembly and connected to that. But we also went with electric connection. So just like the David Clark headsets, you quick connect them. So we would put on the ladder pipe, quick connect it, and we could control it at the turntable. And you can control it at the tip as well. The thing is that we're now starting to see remote control, battery, remote, either be Bluetooth or whatever it is. And the technology is improving, and you guys probably would be able to talk about it more than I could. But reliability, I think, is key. So when we're talking about anything with pumping, firefighters want reliability. That there's the more that we can remove failure points, the better we're going to be. So electric is great. Remote, is a little bit more challenging, but as technology is improving and we get more of them out there and the technology can improve, then those will improve. So yes, I'm a simple man and I would go with the electric.
One of the cool things that's improved in electric, the wireless has gotten a lot better. It used to be affected by things on the scene like your portable radio, other electric devices. That's improved. It's more of a closed network, but you can kind of get the best of both worlds too, because your controls from your turntable can now be CAN based. And just to simplify and not go into an electronics discussion for someone is in old days, you'd have a big harness that had to go up there. Well, everything that goes up that aerial has to go through a track because that aerial extends and retracts. So there's valuable space in there that we can't give up. Now with a CAN based, it's basically a small 2-wire system, and everything's done through that. So we've shrunk the size of the cable. You can be at the turntable where I've got CAN controls and nothing wirelessly can get in my way, but then I can still have that wireless remote if I need it.
Yeah, and I would add that if I can remove a firefighter from the tip of the aerial or even from the bucket, on these fires with cancer and everything else that we're dealing with, I'm all for it. So if we can get that firefighter down and be able to control it from a different aspect, then that's great.
So you mentioned your last truck you bought, your tiller didn't have a waterway,
Yeah.
so you weren't doing an elevated master stream. Ties us right into the next subject we're going to talk about. Any truckies that I say pin waterway, they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. But for our casual audience, they might not understand what a pin waterway is or how it functions and what the operation is. Do you want to go ahead and explain a little bit about a pin waterway and pros and cons?
Yeah, pinned waterway. It's just exactly what it is. You pin the waterway from basically the outer. I guess you would say it would be the outer fly or the last fly where the tip of the aerial is. So you can use that for elevated master stream, and then you could pin it back to one of the inner flies. So it doesn't fully extend and it keeps it out of the way so that you're using the aerial for roof access or rescue situations. Some of the aerial manufacturers will call it rescue mode. And it was a pin. Our old one was that way. I liked it. I thought it worked well. Defensive operations didn't require a lot of speed. I mean, you didn't want to just walk around and look like you're not in any urgency, but going up there and pinning the aerial, making sure that it was in the elevated master stream mode. So it was at the tip. That's all it really was. And now manufacturers have ability to be able to not have to take a pin out and put it into something. And that's great. But yeah, we got rid of the waterway on our newer device. And so now it made it so that we had to actually connect a ladder pipe and hose up the aerial, kind of like the old way. So a little bit more work.
One of the things that developed over the years with the pin waterway is in the old days, like you said, it was literally a pin. And the danger was, and unfortunately we had some line of duty deaths due to this, if you pulled the pin and forgot to put it back in when you were in the right mode and you charged that waterway, you'd launch the end section of the ladder. We actually had a chief in, I believe it was Erie, PA, or the outskirts of Erie, was killed in the line of duty because someone launched the waterway and it landed on him. So
yeah, I was just going to say our earlier Quint, we'll leave the manufacturer out of it. So we're talking, it was built in like the late 80s, early 90s. It had electric device that you use to switch it, and the electric device failed. And while we were training one day, the elevated master stream pushed out of the rescue mode, and we didn't have it launch, but it was a major failure, and it caused some serious damage to the aerial device. So yeah, that's something to be considered with.
When after the line of duty death that I was talking about, NFPA actually stepped in with a temporary amendment and made all the aerial manufacturers find a failsafe that you could not physically launch that anymore. And it's a failsafe now that when you're in either mode, it's going to lock. There's no option to accidentally not lock it. So that certainly has helped.
Yeah, and it was a cardinal sin to lose that pin. I think we lost it one time, and it took forever to get a new one made, manufactured, or milled for us and brought to us.
You're stuck cooking all the meals and washing the rig alone for the rest of the until that new pin arrives.
We couldn't use the aerial device, so the truck company we were in an engine now. We didn't have a reserve aerial, so it was
wow.
You took a little heat for that.
Yes, so let's shift to platform style operations and maybe talk to us about your considerations for one monitor versus two monitors and the controls that would go into that.
Yeah, I'm really limited with platform. We had straight sticks, and we did have my department fire chief wanted to have a reserve apparatus to help bolster our ISO rating. In Washington State, it wasn't ISO though, but if it was Washington State Fire Rating Bureau or something like that. Anyways, so we bought a platform, a used platform out of Virginia Beach, and I got to tell you, it was pretty cool to have. So my experience with flowing two monitors versus one, like firefighters, if more is better, right? If it's take two aspirin, you might as well take three, or take two Tylenol, you might as well take three. If they're offering you a second beer, take it before they don't offer it. So I would say if I had the ability to flow two monitors safely from a platform and have good flows coming from both of them, that's the key. Why not have two, so that you can, and again, this type of apparatus is, because we get in a debate about straight stick and TDAs and everything, and why not get a bucket? And I would say the benefit of bucket or a tower platform, whatever you want to call it, is for rescuing people and for doing elevated master streams. They can flow the most amount of water. And if your organization sees those big conflagration fires, or you're rescuing people out of the third, fourth-story building, then a platform is something you should consider. And just if you had that, and I'm thinking FDNY, and in these old tenement buildings, and you got fire coming from 8 windows on the 4th or 5th floor, why not have two monitors that can be flowing into both of those windows? So my experience is limited with it. We're talking about Quints, right?
Yeah. So, question for you, and this can apply to a tower or to a straight stick. Over the years, I've seen designs where people ask for that pipe at the end to have a little T in it and have a discharge coming off of it. If it's on a tower, typically they're going to carry like 50-foot section of hose up in that tower somewhere. If it's on a straight stick, they're going to hump that ladder up, or that hose up there, and then hook one to the end of it. Now, the purpose for this typically is to do some operations up on the roof. And, my experience, it always was, go up there, cut the hole, and please don't flow water down the hole. We want all the bad stuff to go up out of the hole. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some applications where it makes sense to have a hand line up there. Whether you have experience with it or not, is it anything you've encountered that you'd like to give us some advice on it?
Well, I think from a tactical standpoint, given this consideration, again, it goes back to the department, the number of resources, and what the apparatus is going to be used for. So this has been a debate, at least in my region, utilizing the waterway for like basically a portable standpipe system and connecting into it. And my argument has always been, well, there's plenty of engines that are at the scene that can do portable standpipe by by hoisting hose up the side of the building. And I've been at training events where we've done 13 floors of hose with people like Ray McCormick, and so it can be done fairly easily. But the idea of doing it, my hesitation is when you only have one or two aerial devices on a large commercial building, and you basically connect it so that it has to be used as a standpipe. Now you've limited the use of that aerial device, and so that puts limitations on the organization. Now, are there times that you can do this? Absolutely. Let's think of parking garages, old parking garage that doesn't have a standpipe system in it, and it's on the 5th floor. That's great. You can utilize it to the waterway to make a standpipe system for parking garage. If it's a high rise building and the fire is on the 20th floor, and you're wanting to get up 10 floors to bypass the standpipe system, and there's no potential victims on the lower floors, then I could see it being used. But when you're using that as your goal, is that, hey, I can do this standpipe, I'd be like, talk to the guys and the gals that are working on the engine. I'm sure they'll say, hey, let us give that a shot with some 3-inch hose, or some 2.5, and we can deal with it. So that's from the tactical side of things. Can it be done? Absolutely. And a bucket or a platform is a great one because you can carry a lot of that equipment in the bucket up there, so you don't have to, you know, climb up the aerial with it.
You touched on the point that I personally agree with is the ladder is a limited resource on the scene. There's usually several pumpers there, and there's usually an overabundance of hose laying around. But that ladder device it's got a very unique purpose. It's limited. Maybe let's reserve that for what is needed. And I think all too often we just want to over design and cover that once a decade, once a career type fire. Well, let's make sure we're designing around the everyday event first. And then if we can factor in something that happens once in a while, that's fine. But let's make sure we cover the everyday first.
Yeah, if we think about it, we're here to save people first, and then property, and the majority of fire happens in single family and multifamily dwellings. And if we focus on the single family dwelling, that need is not there. I mean, we need to be able to get in the building, get water flowing on the fire, get a search off, and then vent the building as we go. And if you're using an aerial device on a single family, maybe you guys go to the roof to do vertical ventilation. Maybe you need to go up there for overhaul, whatever it is. But I agree with you. It's like let's think about how we're going to save the most amount of lives, and our bread and butter in America is single family dwelling.
And as we wrap up today, Rob, I want to get your three maybe biggest mistakes that you see on Quint design, and how maybe you can avoid them.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is no planning. Or limited planning. Departments feel like they need an aerial device for various reasons. I consult, and I get from time to time two station department, and they say, hey, we're looking at wanting to staff a Quint. And I'm like, you have two stations? So you want to staff a Quint and have one engine? So you're going to have an engine and a Quint? And it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of good thought into it. I mean, I like the idea that they reached out, and we could have that conversation, and maybe I can steer them in another direction. But so the first thing I would say is planning. Why do you really want a Quint? And the second thing with the Quint is the idea that Quints are this bastardized apparatus, and I think that, again, going back to your organization, you can spec out a suppression capable ladder truck, and but if your organization is big enough where you can staff and appropriately staff a Quint, and you have engines, then taking more from a focus or a mindset of a truck first and an engine second, and making sure that you have a good complement of ground ladders that meets the needs of your organization, and specking a truck. I would say spec the truck around your ground ladder package, and be good with ground ladders, because they never really fail you, and you can always bring them to the scene where you can't always get your aerial device. And I guess, the last one would be feeling that you need to have a Quint. I think I've already kind of covered it with the planning side of it. Is a lot of organizations feel like they have to have a Quint, or I'm sorry, a ladder truck to exist as a department. And that's not necessarily the case. And I think this is where, when we have individual departments, we need to really focus on regionalization, and not necessarily combine all of our departments, but working together collectively so that we can share resources. And if that's one smaller jurisdiction has the ladder company that comes in, and this is more popular on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast. Seems like it's more difficult on the West Coast, but organization has a ladder truck, and they're kind of like for this, 150 square miles or 100 square mile area. They're the ladder truck that's coming in, and another department might have the water rescue, or the heavy rescue, or whatever it is. So other than that, I mean, we make things, and it was said earlier, we make things so difficult ourselves, and trying to put everything on an apparatus, and that we can only do one or two things, even with a 4-person company, be it's an engine or a truck. There's only like two things that we really can do well with that type of staffing. And when you put so much on one apparatus, and some of the old articles written by Mittendorf of like 6 and 7-person Quints, like I've never seen a 6 or 7-person Quint. Now I've been in FDNY, and I've ridden with 6 and 7-person truck companies, but I've never seen a Quint with that type of staffing, and it just putting too much on it technical rescue and heavy rescue stuff and all of these things, and they just overload this apparatus and got so much going for it. So those are a few of the problems I see.
And I think you highlighted a lot of them, but just so we cover it, maybe the top 3 biggest things that you need to consider, not necessarily mistakes, but when you're starting to plan for that Quint and you decided that you wanna spec one and build one, what are the top 3 things that you gotta consider right away?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what's your organization's mission, and having, if you're going to have that truck mindset, if you're going to come together with a truck mindset, then build the apparatus around that mindset. So I already kind of said ground ladders would be one of those. Training is another key. So many organizations, and nothing against the manufacturers, but so many organizations just rely on just the manufacturer to come out and give them their in service on their aerial device, and there you have it. And so I think training is critical. That if you're gonna have an aerial device, there's a number of cadres that are out there that are experts, or I should say subject matter experts in this stuff. And so get appropriate training for your firefighters so that they are comfortable. It helps with their confidence in operating the aerial, and they know what they can do, the limitations of it. And yeah, that, and I'd say consider the calves. If you don't need to have full suppression and treat it as an engine, calves did well for us, and give that some consideration. But that's again another. Your organization's got to be able to support that with a good complement of engines.
Yeah, well, I think this is another great episode. And Rob, again, I really appreciate your time. And I think we are able to draw off a lot of your experience and come away with a lot of takeaways here. Before we get done, though, Jason, I'll open it up to you for any final comments and wrap up.
Again, thanks for joining us, Rob. We really appreciate the insight. I think you touched on two really important things throughout. One of them is everyone's unique, everyone's different. So these are our opinions. We've given you some suggestions, but the bottom line is you have to do what's right for your specific response district. The other thing you said at the very end there that I can touch on is that you have training built in by your OEM when you take delivery of an aerial that they have to give you, but that training is focused on the operations of their specific device that they've supplied to you. It's not on strategy and tactics. So getting that training on strategy and tactics and how to properly utilize what you bought, that's on you. And it is important to get that in addition to what the manufacturer gave you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I enjoy talking Quints and stuff. I teach around the country, and enjoy sharing my experience with others, and I enjoy looking at what everybody else has spec'd out for their apparatus. And sometimes I sit there and scratch my head and I ask the question. They're like, that's a good question. I don't know why we did that. So
Yeah, and before I finish up here, Rob, if someone's interested in learning more or even hearing about some of the training that you do, what's the best way for them to get involved with that?
I'm on all the socials for the most part. Rob Fisher, last name Fisher. So it's Rob Fisher 72. And then my email address is robfisher72@gmail.com. I'll be in North Carolina in November doing a Quint class. I think it's the Crystal Coast conference there in Beaufort, North Carolina. And I got some other stuff coming up for next year. I can't remember exactly. I think I'm going to be at the winter fire conference in Missouri in February. But and I'm always with CFT, so I'll be at HROC in November. There'll be a lot of Velkart guys at HROC as well. It's been a long relationship with Elkhart Brass.
Yeah, that's great. And again, Rob, appreciate your time today. And again, this has been another episode of Rig Recon Live. If you haven't already, follow us on social media at Rig Recon. Make sure you check out all the podcast episodes, including the past ones. We have so much more coming out this year. Most importantly, visit our website, rigrecon.com, for all of the latest apparatus information and design help. And again, until then, expect the best.